First, I'd like to thank you all for being here and thank Code Pink for inviting me to participate in what is sure to be a very informative conversation with colleagues and friends and comrades. I thought the early opening video did a great job in explaining what's going on. I mean, what's going on right now is that the current president of Haiti, Jovenel Moïse, his term was up on February 7th, 2021. He has refused to step down. So there's been a number of protests demanding that he steps down. There's a fight over the Constitution, how the Constitution reads the term of his term. Article 134.1, which he refers to, it says that the 5-year term of the president begins and ends on February 7th following the date of the elections. However, Article 134.2 says that even if there's a protracted election, if there are delays in the election, whenever the election began is when 5 years after the elections began is when the president is supposed to step down. And so there's this fight over that. But part of the other thing is that members of Haiti civil society, including the Haitian Bar Federation, have argued that his term began in 2016 and should end 2021. The thing I want to say, though, about that is Moïse, and I'm careful because part of it is easy to talk about this as this dictator not wanting to step down, as opposed to thinking about the only reason he's able to say I'm not stepping down is because he has the backing of the so-called international community. And so what's the most important thing is that Moïse is being supported by, well, two things. The first thing I want to say is we cannot talk about Haitian sovereignty, we cannot talk about constitution, we cannot talk about elections if we don't acknowledge the fact that Haiti has been under occupation, effective occupation since 2004, when the United Nations came in after the US flew the elected president out of the country and flew him to Africa and sent him into exile, and then brought in 1,000-member occupation, a Chapter 7 United Nations occupation, which numbers have swelled up to 14,000 people, soldiers and police officers and staff. Now, this occupation is ongoing, and some people might not call it occupation because a couple of years ago, they switched the name and diminished the number of soldiers. But these are the people, it is through this UN occupation that you have, for example, the core group, which a lot of people talk about and wonder, what is the core group? We've always wondered, how is it that there's a group that's out there making decisions and issuing press releases about, what's going on in Haiti, what's an election, without any mandate, right? Except that the UN decided to put together a group of people that includes the OAS, that includes people that you'd not think of. Brazil, the European Union, Spain, France, Germany. And so you have to think about, so you have this core group, and then you have the OAS, which you've talked about, which runs elections in Haiti, right? And so part of it is like, how do we talk even about sovereignty? How do we talk about Moïse making decisions when actually all decisions about Haiti are made through the United States, through the UN, through the OAS, and through this core group? And if they were just to decide tomorrow that Moïse would be gone, it would happen. So I think the conversation should be, to me, I think it's important because Moïse has been very brutal, has supported, these attacks on people. There's been tons of protests since even before he came to power. But I do think it's important to keep that aside and say he's acting within this larger framework of occupation. And then we need to hold ourselves accountable living in the US to ask ourselves, why is it that the US government is supporting this, is continuing is pushing the lack of sovereignty for Haiti, and we need to then demand of our government and the United Nations, to which we pay, the country our tax dollars pay for, to do the right thing. Well, I think the first thing is to educate oneself. I think this is an important webinar or just an important event to think about what's going on in Haiti, to find out what's going on in Haiti, because it's not being covered. What gets covered in Haiti is these Haitians are protesting again, and there's violence, and the Blacks are at it again, right? And that's what we always get, right? With the poorest nation in the hemisphere and so on. So we don't get the imperialist news on Haiti. So the first thing is we need to keep an eye on Haiti, and we also need to keep an eye on Haiti consistently, as opposed to every couple of years when it actually cracks the news. So there's that. The other thing is, I think Americans living, people in the US, living in the US, have a moral responsibility to demand of their government, you know, to stop interfering in Haitian politics and Haitian business and to leave Haiti alone. And the truth is, nothing goes on in Haiti without the consent of the US, right? And nothing goes on in the OAS without the consent of the US. And so the US controls this. And so it is our responsibilities as taxpayers to demand that our government leave Haiti alone and to stop its imperial machinations in the country, as well as the entire area. And so I think that's the thing. And so you need to reach out to your representatives. You need to, you know, write op-eds, bring this up with your friends, have study groups, and so on and so forth. But I do think that's an important thing, and that's our moral, not our, you know, that's the moral responsibility of U.S. citizens to really make sure that we deal with the trauma and terror that the U.S. is causing around the world. So I think that's an important thing to think about. I do think, you know, I'm glad Carmen brought up Venezuela, because what they did in Haiti was what that they've been trying to do in Venezuela, right? In terms of sending, you know, people there, you know, to bring down Maduro and so on and so forth. But the other thing is, if it wasn't for WikiLeaks, there's so many things that we know about U.S. machinations in Haiti that we know happen because we know how empire works. But we have like words from government, you know, from diplomats, and especially Petrocaribe was something that was really upsetting for the U.S., for the U.S. corporations. And that's when they turned on Preval, for example. They were extremely upset that Preval did not sign the Petrocaribe agreement and also did not want to move away from it, right? So that was one of the things. And so, you know, that connection between Venezuela and Haiti is very important for us to think about, and think about the imperial machinations. And I think we do need to remember that. And we do need to also step aside from this idea of, you know, these Black people are fighting, they're killing each other, and we show pictures of dead bodies and death spots, and people love that, right? But we also have to think about the white folks who are running, you know, the strings of the puppet that, you know, their current puppet, because they keep having them, they replaced them, right? So we have to remember that. Black Alliance for Peace is an anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist organization, and it's about Black people taking empire on and supporting Black people outside of the U.S. as well as inside of the U.S., but also holding the U.S. accountable, considering we are sitting in the heart of empire. And so Black Alliance for Peace has a Haiti action team that is set to really create, to educate about Haiti, to have events, and to also try and reach out to work with other organizations. But the Alliance is an alliance of organizations, so I have to say that. So there are there's a lot of different groups working with Black Alliance for Peace. And so we had an action last week in front of the Haitian Embassy on Monday. We're planning a couple of more things. We don't have the concrete dates, but we are planning, and I think Dr. Duguay-Prosper can tell us more about this, about the end of the month action. But we're planning to work with her organizations as well as others. And then we plan to have a couple of more events. In particular, our goal is to actually protest empire. So protest the core group, protest OAS, right? Because I don't think people realize the significance of the Organization of American States. And we need to figure out who this core group is and why they have so much power, right? And so that's our goal, is to attack those in the major, the infrastructure of empire, you know, that goes beyond the US. And so that's what we're working on. And so we have a Haiti action page on our Black Alliance for Peace website. So please keep checking that, and we'll have updated information. We have a Twitter, Facebook, and so on and so forth.